Hello everyone, thank you for joining me today. So, title today is AutoCAD Block Editor, and what we're going to be going over is adding constraints to actions and parameters. Now this is going to be dealing obviously inside the block editor environment, and pretty much we're going to be going through some of the different options that we've seen in the parametric tab as well. So you've probably seen constraints before in the authoring palette, actions and parameters and action sets. We can go over all those and just kind of show how their function is, what the purpose is behind them. And actually, there's a lot of good features, I guess you can say, are good ways to utilize constraints, especially when it comes to just adding a little bit more flexibility to your actions and parameters. So go ahead and feel free to leave any questions too. I'll leave that off towards the end, and if I find it appropriate, maybe I can answer it during the webinar here too. But just to go ahead and get started here, this is also going to be kind of a continuation. I've done another webinar over dynamic blocks. So this is just going to kind of go a little bit more in depth here. So let's go ahead and get started. So dynamic blocks, just a quick overview. Dynamic blocks extends the capabilities of traditional blocks by providing the ability to define custom grips and properties for your blocks, which affect the geometry for the block. With dynamic blocks, you can use one block definition that has a different visual appearance and different properties for each instance of the block in your drawing. Now, that's also referring to, there's also like visibility states that you could add to your blocks as well too. So there's quite a bit of things you could do there besides just constraints and actions and parameters. There's also like lookup tables, so quite a few features there. So to get started here, actions and parameters. Again, this is just kind of a little quick overview again. Parameters, obviously they're going to determine the geometry that will be affected by an action when you manipulate a block reference. When you add a parameter to a dynamic block definition, grips are displayed at key points of the parameter. Key points are the parts of the parameter that you use to manipulate the block reference. So in this graphic right here, for the parameter for this block, this is an angle parameter here just for the rotation. And parameters, they kind of work hand in hand with actions, and I'll give you a little demonstration of that as well too. So parameters don't really necessarily affect the geometry by itself. Again, it just giving the end user these key grips that they can control at those certain points. And this is where actions come into play. Actions, an action displays its name and icon, a lightning bolt, in the block editor. Actions are grouped into bars, which display all actions associated with a parameter. Now down here, this is a rotation action. There's a little lightning bolt right there. And this would be applied to this rotation parameter here. So the action does have to be, pertain to the parameter as well too. So that's another thing I could cover here. Insertion point, obviously every block's going to have that. You could also create, I could show you how to place in a new insertion point even after the fact. Might be worth going over. And down at the bottom, just another visibility parameter there. Okay, so geometric constraints. Geometric constraints, I believe, were introduced with AutoCAD 2011, but this is actually one of the, at least from my experience, I find a lot of end users not necessarily using these tools, and I feel like this is actually really worth learning and using for your office. And you can see here in a bit too. You could do some pretty unique as far as controlling the geometry, and again, it just adds another dimension of flexibility to your blocks too. And you can see here from this example that I'm going to do after this. Geometric constraints define persistent relationships based on basic geometric properties of the entity or entities you apply them to. Geometric constraints can be, now it just kind of shows a list, and we can kind of go over some of these as well too. But these are going to be all the different types of constraints here. And from this little example, I use the parallel here for these lines just to make sure that these always remain parallel, perpendicular, right there. And then coincident, these little points right here, just so these will always connect. So yeah, that's that. All right. Also, dimensional constraints. Now, I found that dimensional constraints actually work a little bit better with the geometric constraints. They kind of go hand in hand. Dimensional constraints define constraints between geometry and your drawing that look and behave a lot like dimension entities. And you're going to have all your other types of dimensional entities like aligned, horizontal, vertical, radial, diameter, angular, all that. And the example that I'm going to be going over is a driveway. And first what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how you can add these geometric constraints to your actions and parameters. But like I said, there's some cases where it almost seems like the dimensional constraints kind of work a little bit better, or it's a little bit more user-friendly, I guess you could say. But really, as far as creating blocks, dynamic blocks, the sky is really the limit. There's a lot of stuff you can do with it, and it just it really depends on how well you know all the items in the authoring palette. Honestly, I learn new stuff every day, and I can also kind of show you some little tips and tricks here as well as I'm going through this. Okay, so time for the demo. Let me go ahead and open up AutoCAD drawing here. All right, so for this example here, we're going to be looking at this, there's a little simple driveway here. So right now, there's nothing applied to it. It's just a simple block. There's the insertion point right there. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and go right into the block editor. Go ahead and open that up. And usually when I'm in the block editor, there's two things I like to have open. There's the authoring palette, and there's the properties here. There's also a parameter manager. I won't really necessarily get too much into that today. I could probably leave that off for another webinar. There's some other features you can do with that, and that kind of pertains more to as far as controlling these dimensional constraints. So I'll just kind of hold off on that for now. But yeah, this authoring palette here, just again, there's your parameters, actions. Below that, there's also parameter sets. And this is just pretty much a combination of both actions and parameters. And constraints, these are the items we're going to be looking at a lot today, the geometric and constraint parameters. Okay, so to start off with here, let's go ahead and just add in a simple stretch parameter here. And let's say I just want to stretch this portion from down this line right here to this, just so I can kind of control this part of the driveway. So let me go ahead and let me just add in parameter here, linear, and start off with, go ahead and start at this endpoint. It's kind of placed off to the side. And I could always readjust where the grip is going to be displayed to. But to start off with, I'll just go ahead and set the grip display to 1. I'll just set that right there for now. And obviously the parameter is going to need an action to it. So first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how this will function without any of the geometric constraints, just so it kind of illustrates how they affect the block a little bit better. I feel like it's a little bit easier to understand. So let me go ahead and select stretch here. Select parameter, distance 1, grip point going to be right here at that node. And first corner of stretch frame, I'll just create the stretch frame right here. Select my geometry. I'm just going to be controlling this portion of the driveway. Now I'm going to go ahead and enter. Now, anytime I place in a parameter or action or do anything, I like to test the block out. Just kind of a way to just kind of keep track of how you're controlling your block. So let's go ahead and select that grip point, drag it. So right now it's functioning the way that I expected it to, but let's say maybe I wanted the line right here just to kind of follow along this path right here. You can do that with constraints, which is kind of cool. So I'm just going to go ahead and let me just close out of the test block here. So that's pretty much what, it's pretty much just obviously a stretch action with this grip here. That's what the action parameters are. Close that. Now, this is where you could find your geometric constraints here. Also, if you wanted to, you could use the authoring palette. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and let's start adding some constraints here. So first one I want to look at here is the coincident constraint here. Constrains 2 points to coincident or a point to lie anywhere on an object or the extension of an object. So let me go ahead and select this here. Alright, so first off what I'm going to do is I want to look at this line segment and see that little red dot, that node. That's where I'm going to start my first point here. And if I wanted to, I could constrain it somewhere to the line right here. Now I don't necessarily have to use these nodes. Right now it's giving me two options, or sorry, three. One for the midpoint and each for the endpoints right here. So if I wanted to, I can actually constrain this to an object. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select object, and then I'm just going to come here and select the line. I'm going to do the same here for this side. Coincident, select that, object. So now this is where I would have to go in and test this, see how this is functioning here. So test block, and let's see what that did. So let me go ahead and select that grip. So obviously now it's connected with the line, but let's say maybe I wanted this portion of the driveway to remain constant. So there's a couple other things we would have to do there for that. And see right up top here, if I added a coincident, obviously this portion of the line segment, this would be connected with each other. So that's pretty much what that does here. So this is pretty much just keeping alignment with this object. So let me go ahead and close block right there, or sorry, test block. Okay, so, and I could also take that grip and maybe I want to move it to the center. All right. Now, also there is a fixed point. So if I wanted to, I said we wanted to make this remain constant, so I could fix that at that point. Fix that right up there as well. And really, when it comes to adding constraints, I just kind of really add them, not really one at a time, but like I said, I refer to the test block quite a bit. I just find it's a good workflow because it's easy to keep track of where you're at, because it can be a little confusing when it comes to adding, especially a bunch of constraints. So right now it's functioning almost the way I want it to. Right now I just got to add in a couple more of those coincident constraints. So one for right there, one for right there, and then the same over here, right on this end and that endpoint right there. Okay, so let me go back to test block, select my block here, and couple more, one more thing I have to do here. So this end is, or sorry, yeah, this point right here on the left side is functioning the way I want it to. So just have to add in one more constraint here. And that's pretty simple. I'm just going to go ahead and close that. This is where that horizontal constraint constrains a line or pairs of points to lie parallel to the x-axis of the current UCS. So let me go ahead and select that. Add that to the line right there. Test block. So now let's see if everything's working the way we want it to. There you go. So that was just a little example of how that can be controlled as far as adding constraints to your block. Let me go ahead and close that. Now let me go ahead and show you another method here. So besides, let me go ahead and just delete that here. Besides that action parameter, what I could also do is I could add in a linear dimension here. So I'm just going to go ahead and select that and select this endpoint, that endpoint right there. And it's just going to place that grip right up there. Now let me go ahead and test that. So yeah, it's pretty much going to function. In a way, I kind of feel like I would almost prefer using dimensional constraints in this regards. And let me go ahead and just add in another one here right up top. So maybe we want to control both portions of the driveway here. So let me go ahead and place that one right there. See how that functions. So now this is where I'd have to add in some more constraints. And again, like I said, it's just almost not, you don't necessarily have to do it like one at a time, but just kind of play around with it, maybe add in some coincidence right here so that that would always remain at the same location there. Go ahead and select this dimension right there. And just move that off to the side over here. Test that one more time. Yeah, and this is pretty much what I'm talking about. It takes a little bit more steps sometimes. So I'd probably have to add in another, I'm guessing, horizontal down here for that line segment. It's still acting a little goofy there. And what I can do is, in this case, it might be easier to add in an action and parameter, just kind of like we did down at the bottom. So in this case, this portion's fine for that dimensional constraint. But right up here, maybe it might be better to add in an action and parameter, so I can control this portion of the block. So, I mean, I can make either one work. I mean, it's really up to you, whatever method you find easier, just as long as you kind of know where you're at. In this case, I'm just going to add in one more parameter here, action stretch. Stretch frame, and then let's say maybe I just want to control this portion here. And I'll just maybe select these lines too. Test block. Now let's see if this, yep. So let's see what's going on here. Modify that. Move. Maybe it's because I selected those lines. Yep, no. So obviously this takes a lot of testing. There's probably a step I missed somewhere in there. But also another thing to look at here, in the Manage panel, there is also some construction lines you can use. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. Converts objects to construction geometry. Construction geometry is not displayed in the block reference, and the block editor is displayed with gray dashed line type. So pretty much this is almost like an invisible line. So if you wanted to add in, let's say maybe I just wanted to control maybe this middle portion, I want it to be construction line. I'm going to go ahead and select construction geometry, select this line right here, press enter, and I'm going to go ahead and convert that. So this is pretty much what that was saying in that example. It's a little gray dashed line right there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to test this block. And let me go ahead and take this grip here. And yeah, pretty much it's just like an invisible line. You know, I'm just controlling this portion of the driveway now. So that's pretty much what that construction line does. Close block. And then if you wanted to convert it back, you just select construction, select a line, enter, and revert that back. So quite a few things you could do there. Also, with the parameters too, not all parameters necessarily need an action to be applied to it as well too. There's some that just kind of, for example, base point. If you wanted to change the insertion point of the block after the fact, you would just select base point right here. And let's say maybe I want it to be right there instead. And same with visibility parameter. And this is just a little lookup and visibility, pretty similar. This has to do with visibility states. And this is something I could probably go over to in another webinar here. There's quite a few things you can do with both of these actually. But let me go ahead and just close this for now. Save changes. That's usually how I, there's also two options. You can just save block right there, but usually I just close block, save changes, and exit block editor. So now the main thing is just kind of see how this would function inside your drawing. So let me go ahead and go to Insert, hit the drop down, let's select Test, place that. So there we go, that's functioning the way I wanted it to. And yeah, right there, there's that base point or that insertion point. So now that's working the way we want it to. Very good. Okay, so let me go ahead and just see, let me look at some of the questions here. So what are the different grip display options? How are they different? So grip display options, let me go back into here. So there's some things you could do with the grip display options. And for example, actually let me go ahead and just create a simple piece of geometry right here. Now, there's a couple different ways we can do this. Let me go ahead and just create a test block here. Pick a point. Go back in the block editor. Now, linear. So if you wanted to, with the grip display options, there's two grips you have right here. And one of the reasons why I like having the properties open too is that there's some elements you can adjust with the actions, for example. So let's say maybe, for example, I wanted to control this block by selecting the grip up here up top and changing that, and also selecting the grip down at the bottom and changing that as well. Now, if I wanted to, let me go ahead and go to the actions here. Stretch, select this parameter, select that grip. Obviously right here, could have that grip display control that portion, and same right here, stretch. I could select this distance, select that node, select that portion, and have that bottom portion be controlled by this grip. Okay, close that. Now if I wanted to, I could also have just one grip display. And for this one, I could change the distance multiplier in the negative direction. So that way I can have this block stretch both ways evenly. Test block. Now I'd have to come back and adjust. Let me go ahead and show you. There's one step I needed to do. So let me select this right here, new selection set. And this is probably where I'd have to just create a new stretch parameter. Stretch, select parameter. I want it to be controlled at this point as well. But the stretch frame will be down here instead. Select that, enter, and then change the distance multiplier here. See that? All right. Can you key in those distances? Okay, thank you. Key in those distances, you mean just like select the grip and type in like a distance, for example? Something like that. And yeah, if feel free to, if I can't get around to all the questions too, I could just email you back. Or if I don't necessarily answer your question. Let's see here. Like on the driveways, if the initial apron should be 5 feet. Okay. I'm going to close that here. So, let's see here, block editor. As far as keying in those distances, I know, let me just go ahead and select this. Now where parameters are a little bit different from dimensional constraints, you can control like the value set right here, like the distance. I could set it to either none, or I can make it either increment or a list. Is that kind of what you're talking about? Like I can set this to an increment of maybe a distance of 5 with minimum of 5 feet, something like that, so I can kind of control that. Yeah. Yeah. So pretty much that's mostly what I had planned for today. Go ahead and close out of this here. Start changes. And that's just a little brief example right there. Like I said, there's a lot of stuff you can do with geometric constraints and these actions and parameters. If you think of any other ideas, like if you're creating content at your office and you had any more like specific questions about the block editor, feel free to just email me too. And I could have the marketing team send that information out to my email address. But besides that, I'll go ahead and I'll get around to the rest of your questions here later. But I just want to thank everyone here for attending this little demonstration here in this presentation. If you have any questions, any support questions, again, feel free to email us at support@cadtechnologycenter.com. Yeah, and if you're working, again, like on any blocks and you had a question about something, or if it's not working the way you wanted to, feel free to send that to support, and I could take a look at it here and just kind of point you in the right direction there. Also, feel free to give us a call, the number down at the bottom, and yeah, you can watch all our YouTube videos too. CAD Technology Center is our channel. Yeah, so having said that, thanks again, and hope everyone has a great day.